Hello, my loves, and welcome to Strange Playgrounds. Now, I've reached the point now where I don't know how many of these bloody things I've actually recorded. I've got a lot in the wings. I've got a lot that need to be edited together. I did recently a very, very interesting discussion with Rowan B. Fortune, Rowan Fortune Wood, whose channel you can find knocking about here somewhere, and also whose work you will find links to below, about all sorts of things. All sorts of topics, including utopian fiction, politics, video games, cinema, nostalgia and its corrosive effects, and all sorts of stuff. It was great fun. That will be up here very, very soon. But one of the big topics that's out there at the moment that I really want to talk about is... there was an announcement recently, quite topically, considering that we actually talked about the collections not too long ago on Strange Playgrounds. There was an announcement that Clive Barker is working again. Now, of course, this is just an announcement, and it may mean nothing. It may be nothing. It may come to nothing. So much of these announcements do come to nothing, as we've discussed previously. However, there have been a number of projects that have been mooted. Apparently, he is writing again. There is apparently either a novel or a novella that's due for release at some point relatively soon. That's exciting. That's enormously bloody exciting. But beyond that, the thing that's making the rounds on the internet at the moment is that there are talks about a TV series of the Books of Blood. Now, this could be spectacular. This has the potential to be the kind of show that has never been seen before. It could be very much like the horror equivalent of Black Mirror, as Black Mirror is for science fiction, which is phenomenally clever. This wonderful sort of anthology series where every story is self-contained and deals with a very particular and very trenchant and poignant theme or idea, or a very culturally resonant ideas. A TV series of the Books of Blood has the potential to be that, but for horror. It could revolutionize the genre in horror. I mean, at the moment, there are quite a few, actually, thanks to the likes of Netflix and streaming services, but also to certain trends that are happening in more just sort of mainstream television. There are quite a few horror shows out there. We've had things like The Walking Dead, for better or worse. We've also had The Haunting of Hill House, Sabrina, that kind of thing. Plus numerous others on Netflix streaming services, but also on mainstream television and from mainstream networks. It seems to be in the ascendant again. Unfortunately, we do have this issue where it can be very staid. It can be very prescribed. I mean, if I take The Walking Dead as an example. I thought the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead were very good. I actually really enjoyed the first 2 seasons. I know the second season, everyone hated it. I actually rather liked it. I liked the change of pace. I liked the stillness that it brought to things, whereas the first season was all sort of establishing the characters, their histories, and it was lots of running, lots of trauma. The second season had this wonderful stillness about it, where they were in one place, and they were trying to defend and establish that one place. And I liked that. I actually really rather liked that, in contrast to the first season. Unfortunately, since then, I would say the show has been spinning its wheels largely. The problem being it's a one-trick pony. It's a one-trick pony. Once you realise that what the show is doing is just exposing these characters to the most hideous traumas imaginable, then that's as far as it goes. And that's all it seems to have. That's the problem. That's all the show seems to have. How much trauma can we throw at these characters? And that's all well and good. That's fine. But does that sustain 6... Oh, no, it's more than that now. It's like 8 seasons of storytelling. No, it really doesn't. It barely sustains 3. In my estimation. And that's a shame, because everything else about the show is pretty good. The settings, the effects, the practical effects, the makeup, all of that is wonderful. I really, really like that stuff. I don't see it going anywhere. I don't. My big problem with The Walking Dead, and I stopped watching about after season 4. I haven't really kept up with it since then, except in dribs and drabs. Is that it's all the same. It's all the same. It is just they move on, they find a place to settle, it all goes to shit, usually through some human inadequacy or stupidity or corruption. The zombies come in and they have to go. They have to go again. Some characters die, some characters survive, some hideous trauma occurs, they have to get over it and they have to move on. Harsh life lesson and move on. That seems to be it. That seems to be the formula. And it is very formulaic. It is phenomenally formulaic. For me, The Walking Dead could have done with being more like The Haunting of Hill House, in the sense that it could have done with being a finite story with a definite beginning, middle, and ending. That would have worked. Unfortunately, because it became popular, they've done exactly what they always do. They've dragged it out. They've synthetically stretched it like a body being stretched across a rack. Or to borrow a metaphor, like a simile from The Lord of the Rings, like butter being spread over too much bread. It just doesn't sustain. It doesn't sustain. Once you've seen it, once you've seen the worst of it, and the worst of it came in season 2 by and large, that's it. That's the end. It's done. You can't go any further. It's my problem with like the Hostel films or like pornography films in general. Once you realize that what all these products are going to do is expose you to human trauma and mutilation, then it's like, oh, okay, fine. They can't shock you anymore. Once they've shown you the extent of what they can do, it's sort of like, fine, whatever, get on with it. Because there's nothing else that sustains. There's no real story. There's no real character development. There's just the same stuff over and over and over and over. It's dull. What a TV adaptation of the Books of Blood has the potential to do is completely invert that. First of all, it is not one story. It's like Black Mirror. It's going to be it's an anthology of stories, all of which are separate, but which have certain common elements or themes. So there's that. That has enormous potential, and I love those shows. I absolutely love those shows. I love Inside Number 9. That is a fabulous example of a British equivalent, created by Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton. Absolutely bloody stunning. Inside Number 9. It's an anthology show where every single episode is different. They all have certain common elements, but beyond that, they are all different. Some of them are funny, some of them are sinister, some of them are disturbing, some of them are like domestic dramas or weird, surreal pieces. It is a stunning, stunning show. And because it's all different, you never get bored. You never get to that point that The Walking Dead has got to, where it's just the same thing and you know what to expect. It's wonderful. They're all experiments in storytelling, high invention. It's of the same ilk as Tales of the Unexpected, which I also love. I also Hitchcock's Half Hour, which again I absolutely frigging adore. If you haven't seen Hitchcock's Half Hour, go and watch it. It is so subversive. Honestly, you've never seen anything like it. I think Hitchcock's direction actually works better in the format of a TV series than it does in the format of cinema. And I know there may be some people going at that, but because it's a kind of blasphemy. But for my money, it does. I think that Hitchcock's direction and storytelling in Hitchcock's Half Hour is some of his best work. I really, really do. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. This is what the Books of Blood have the potential to be. Like Hitchcock's Half Hour, like Black Mirror, like Inside Number 9, but even more perverse, even more transgressive. But for that to work, for that to actually work, the creators are going to have to understand what those stories are about. They're going to have to understand what Barker was doing. What will not work is if they approach them like, as so many people do adaptations of Barker, where they popularize them. That is not going to work. Okay? Because if they approach it that way, it will just be stuff we've seen before. If they look at the subtleties of the stories, if they look at the strange imagery, the surreal implications, and don't try to popularize them in any particular way, or soften them for that matter, then this could be spectacular. There are images and there are concepts in the Books of Blood that have never been seen on television before, that have never been seen in cinema before. I've never seen anything like the warring cities in the hills, the cities. Can you imagine the image of that if it's realised well? The giants that are made up of the strapped together populations of two cities. It could be amazing. Could you imagine Down Satan? The visual realization of the synthetic hell that's created in Down Satan. Man, that could be amazing. The variety of sadism that could show. It could be like unlike anything else, unlike anything that's ever been seen before. What about the surreal imagery of human remains? What about the transgressive elements of human remains or skins of the fathers? What if the sexual elements of the age of desire are retained and are not shied away from? This could be a milestone. It has the potential to be a milestone in television because these stories are still so transgressive, not only in terms of their imagery, which is overt and graphic, as you would imagine. I mean, they're called the Books of Blood, and they live up to that. There is flying gore and flesh and limbs and bits and pieces all over the place, but that's not really what they're about. The Books of Blood, as we discussed in a previous episode, are inversions of certain, not only horror, but mythological and literary tropes, which is something that Barker does so well. And in order to function, in order to work, any adaptation, any sort of visual adaptation is going to have to capture that. They're going to have to understand that. One thing I desperately don't want to see is the standard tropes that occur when these kinds of stories are adapted. They take them and then they popularize them. So they add in things that they think that people want, that mainstream audiences want. Like, they will always fucking say it needs a love story, it needs a love interest. Most of them fucking don't. So I really don't want to see that sort of thing. That would dilute them enormously. All of the stories in the Books of Blood are about the right length to adapt to like a 30-minute, maybe an hour episode for each installment. That would work beautifully. They have the right flow for a television series. They really do. They're sort of cinematic in and of themselves. They obviously have an influence from things like comic books and cinema. You can actually see that when you read them. They're highly visual for the most part, so lend themselves to adaptation. I'm thinking in particular about The Body Politic in this one, which is a brilliant story. In fact, that was the first one I ever read. That was the first one of the Books of Blood I ever read. And in The Body Politic, you have this really weird situation where the hands of humanity rebel. The hands of humanity become sentient and rebel against their owners and start to strangle them and start to kill them and start to hack themselves off. And then they go off on their own journeys. They start a revolution, and the hands of humanity rebel against humanity itself. It's really cool, really clever, very surreal and strange. But the imagery of that could be wonderful. But handled badly, it could be risible. It could be stupid. It could look like Thing from the Addams Family, It could be funny, and that's really not what we want. Although there is an element of black comedy to the story itself, it should remain understated black comedy and gallows humor, and it shouldn't rise to the status of like outright comedy. Certainly not as a result of ineptitude of the rendering. It has the potential to be terrifying because it can make people paranoid about their own bodies, which was a big thing in the 80s and is still a big thing now. It can make you paranoid about parts of yourselves and processes that you've never consciously considered before. It's really clever, really bloody clever. What about the feminist parables in the Books of Blood, which of course no male writer was writing at the time of the Books of Blood's publication. They could be very particular at this, given how ideologically fraught the world is at the moment. Tales like Jacqueline S., Her Will and Testament could be very, very, very interesting because it is in almost every respect a feminist parable, but it's also a postmodern feminist parable in the sense that it assumes, first of all, it comprehends and assumes its own feminist reading and interpretation and then inverts it and brings it into question. It's very clever, very bloody clever in that regard. There's another one which is what is it called? I cannot remember the name of the story, but it's absolutely spectacular. It's the story where... The Madonna. It's called The Madonna. It's the story where there is this tribe of otherworldly women who worship this divinity, this divinity that is almost like the encapsulation of all femaleness, of femininity and femaleness. She is this surreal, ripe, shifting entity that, as one of the characters puts it, could make babies from rainwater if it wanted to. It is like fundamentally ripe and fecund and gives birth to these incredibly surreal monstrosities. But in the Madonna, you have this situation where men are not portrayed very fondly. No, certainly not heterosexual men are not portrayed very fondly. It is a critique of prescriptions of masculinity. This story, that's exactly what it's about. But they are transformed by their contact with these otherworldly women. They actually become female themselves, and it's about how the men handle that, how they cope with it. It's a very clever story, very bloody clever story. And again, the kind of shit no one was writing at the time, no one. And still, even to this day, it's shit that's really transgressive, really transgressive. The gay characters, okay, there has been something of a revolution in this in terms of popular media. There's more acknowledgement of LGBTQ characters and subjects and situations in almost all forms of media now, but not like this. Not with the degree of complexity and ambiguity that appears in the Books of Blood. In Human Remains, Barker sort of explores. He doesn't really explore being gay as such, although it is semi-autobiographical. It does actually portray a part of Barker's life that was very, very interesting when you go back and look at it. Very interesting indeed. When he was almost homeless, penniless, and was working as a rent boy on the streets of London. That's what the story is about. It's about a guy who encounters an entity, a creature, which is a statue. It's like a living statue. It's kind of Frankensteinian. It's kind of like a vampire at the same time. What the statue, this entity does, it lacks identity. It lacks its own identity. It is a vacuum of identity. And it, by a series of circumstances, meets this gay guy, this rent boy, and it likes him. It finds him attractive, it finds him beautiful, so it takes his identity, it takes his appearance, it takes his emotion, it takes everything about him. And what's really interesting is, this is not necessarily portrayed as a negative thing. It's very ambiguous. The entity is not entirely a monster. In fact, some of the things that the gay guy himself does are more monstrous than what the statue does. And at the end, when they finally come face to face and the statue is more him than he is, the statue is in a state of suffering where he isn't. It has taken his humanity and taken away, in so doing, has taken away a fundamental source of his suffering. It's given him this openness of identity where he doesn't have to be prescribed by anything anymore. He is his own creation, suddenly. And it's very cool. It's very ambiguous. Very clever, and I've never seen anything like it on television, outside of maybe the likes of Blade Runner. Some science fiction plays with this, where you have things like replicants and cyborgs and synthetic humans or clones, for example. Some science fiction plays with this, but I've never seen it done in this way, and with all of these other themes attached to it. If these stories are captured with some legitimacy and fidelity, I can't imagine what this will be like. It will be something that courts controversy. You will get people protesting this stuff because it's so deviant, it's so transgressive. Like myself, in my own work, in my own writings, Barker champions a certain transgressivism. He is a kind of metaphysical anarchist and ideological anarchist. He celebrates the collapse of prescription and the refutation of tradition in a way that very few writers do, even in horror or in science fiction or in fantasy. And that's very difficult in television, because television is by its very nature such a buttoned-down, conservative medium. But this has the potential to be absolutely incredible. if it comes off at all, let's bear that in mind. I mean, there is a long history, as we've established in this series and in my Barker retrospectives. There is a long history of Barker products or Barker projects being mooted, being talked about, and then never happening, or happening in a very understated and underbaked way, which is really sad. But if this could be something that not only brings him back, that only puts him on the map again, but which does for television what he did for horror fiction and short stories in the 1980s, this could be amazing. This could be amazing, and I hope it does. Bloody hell, I hope it does. I hope this is the return of Clive Barker. I hope this is the return of the man we know and love, and whose work we want, whose work we basically salivate for. It's exciting. Even given recent disappointments, this is really bloody exciting. Let's see. Let's keep an eye on the project and see where it goes, shall we? I hope this is it. I hope that wonderful magic occurs that sometimes does around these projects, where they get the right studio, the right director, the right funding, the right people involved, where they all understand what it means and they want to create something beautiful. They want to create something transgressive and counterculture, something that inverts or exposes the hypocrisies that pervade our day-to-day discourses. Because it could be that. It could be that. Some of this stuff is going to cause absolute uproar. I mean, I can't remember what it's called, but there's that one story about the woman who goes on holiday and she finds herself running afoul of a compound. She finds herself on a compound which she discovers houses all of the greatest minds of the last couple of centuries, the last couple of decades rather, like the greatest scientists, philosophers, artists, and they are the people who secretly run the world. It's kind of like an Illuminati thing, like a conspiracy theorist wet dream. However, what Barker does is he inverts that. He inverts the standard narrative by having, yes, this thing exists, this community exists, and they do run the world, but they're not in control. They don't know what they're doing. So they play games. They roll dice. They gamble. They bet. They race snails to see what economies collapse, what countries go to war with one another, what countries collapse into genocide and tyranny. Barker's commentary there, it being a really despairing and nihilistic one on the state of politics, of global politics, which is, he's basically saying that this may as well be true. Given the absolute atrocity that is becoming commonplace on the world stage, that may as well be true. It would make no difference if it was. That's what he's saying. Because nobody or nothing is actually in control. It's a delusion. It's absolutely brilliant, but I can imagine that if that episode airs, if it's done with fidelity, that could cause absolute fucking uproar, especially amongst sort of more buttoned down or traditionally political peoples. It could be awful. It could be brilliant. It could cause protests and all sorts of things. Let's hope so, eh? All publicity is good publicity, But yes, I'm very excited, but cautiously so. I'm keeping an eye on it. I'm not going to allow myself to hope for anything, because it may come to nothing. A lot does. It may come to nothing. But if it does, this could be something really special. Really special. So, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, ta-ta!